Well, I think last time, if I'm not mistaken, what we're going to do tonight is finish up Pavlov, and then we're going to talk about Guthrie. And next week we're going to review. I'll probably spend the whole time reviewing, and then you'll have your first test will be on the 14th, which is Monday the 14th. And you'll just come in and take the test and then go home. So that'll probably give you an extra, 10 minutes or something. No. But anyhow, you'll come in, take the test, go home, and you're going to need one of those number 30423 Scantrons, the large blue shaded Scantron, and you'll need a number 2 pencil, of course, on Monday the 14th. But I'll remind you again next week, but I'm just giving you a little heads up on that. And you'll need 3 of those because you'll use a separate Scantron for each of the 3 tests that you're going to take in here, just so you know that as well. All right, now last time, I believe where we left off, I was looking here, we had talked about the Rescorla-Wagner theory, and we talked about contingency, how contingency is important in classical conditioning. Contiguity is also necessary, but maybe not sufficient. So remember I said that originally with, just put the screen up. Originally with Pavlov, he was saying what's necessary is contiguity and a reinforcer, a US, for classical conditioning. But you've seen now there are some exceptions to the rule. This is no good. Straightforward conditioning. And Pavlov said you've got to have the CS and the US paired together closely in time. That's contiguity. And you got to have the US, which is the reinforcer in classical conditioning. Now, but you learned, because of some of those recent developments in classical conditioning, blocking, overshadowing, those are examples of exceptions to the rule. Because remember, in overshadowing, that's when you have a compound stimulus here. And so you have 2 CSs here with overshadowing. And that compound is followed by a US. But because one stimulus is more salient than the other one, and I guess I could just draw it with a, is that an eraser? Oh, look, a cell phone. Oh, wow, that's cell phone. No. If you've got one stimulus which is really salient, it overshadows any conditioning to the other part of that compound stimulus. And so you're saying, well, wait a minute, here's a CS that was paired with a US, contiguity, and there is a US. There should be some classical conditioning taking place here, but there isn't, or it's very weak. And so that's an exception to the rule. So you mean maybe contiguity might be necessary but not sufficient? Yeah. And then, of course, you have blocking. And you remember blocking is that phenomenon where you bring about a conditioned response to this, then you pair that CS1 with another CS, the US. Then you present the CS1 by itself and the CS2 by itself. And the question is, are you going to get a conditioned response? And as it turns out, you get one to the first CS, but not the second one. You get conditioning to the first part of this compound, but not the other part. Why is that? Well, because the previous conditioning over here blocked any conditioning to the CS2 here. The conditioning here sort of made the US not surprising in the second part of this procedure. So therefore, no new learning took place here. Oh, so that's another exception to the rule. Here's another situation where a CS is paired with a US, and there is a US, but no conditioning takes place. But it does to the CS1, which is to say, so again, contiguity is important or necessary, but not sufficient. And you have a reinforcer there too. Now, then you recall we had a discussion about Rescorla having to do with contingency. And that is to the extent that a stimulus has some predictive utility for this, that there is a close predictive relationship between the CS and the US. In other words, that one is contingent on the other. Then you get conditioning. So therefore, it's contiguity and contingency. What's necessary is contingency. Contiguity is, I should say, contiguity is necessary, but it's not sufficient. But you put contiguity and contingency together, and now you got something. That any stimulus here has to reliably predict this. It's not just enough that they just happen to occur together in time. One has to be a reliable predictor of this. And the study that we looked at in that regard, I'm backing up just a little bit, but the study that we looked at in that regard was this thing. I'll just project it up here. I'll forget this screen because I'm going to probably get off of it in just a second. As soon as it won't go. It was that diagram with the little with the S's and the T's and the two groups. Anyway, I'm talking about page am I talking about? Page 171 in your textbook. But anyway, what Rescorla showed was that there has to be a contingent relationship between the CS and the US. If one is present, the other one is present. And if the first one is present, it's always followed by the second one, namely the US. And you got to have that kind of a relationship for conditioning classical conditioning to take place.
Between both those?
Yeah, let me just get this thing up here so we can take a look at the picture, which I think always helps. You remember this? Here, there's a perfect contingency between the CS and the US. They occur together perfectly. If one's present, if the CS is present, it's always followed by the US. If there was a US, it was always preceded by the CS. That's a perfect predictive relationship. What's the probability that you're going to see a US if the CS is present? 1. Probability of 1. If it was anything less, if they were not paired up perfectly like this, the probability of a US given a CS would be less than 1. And up here, this is supposed to illustrate kind of a random presentation of CS's and US's, right? So, well, sometimes they're paired together, sometimes they're not. But sometimes they are. Well, so then what's the probability of a US given a CS? Way less than 1, I can tell you that. But the interesting thing is, what's pitted here, the first group against the second, is that they are perfectly paired up on these 4 trials. So you're saying, well, if it was just contiguity here, they are perfectly paired up in both groups.
The second tone? Like it's a double tone, like they did it twice?
Yeah, okay, tone and then tone again. Sure. But the point is in both groups, the tone, the CS and the US are paired in exactly the same trials, and yet you get strong conditioning here, very weak, if any, conditioning here. Why is that? Because contiguity is not sufficient. You got to have contingency. This thing has to reliably predict that. It doesn't here. It predicts it sometimes, but sometimes it does not predict it. Sometimes the US is here with no CS at all. Do you all understand this concept of contingency? Any questions? Oh, great. Okay, then that's one question you got right on the test. But, all right, so contingency and contiguity, they're both, well, one is necessary but not sufficient. But you put the two together and then you get some classical conditioning going on. Now, I backed up just a little bit there because now, what if you just have a randomly presented shock to an organism? What'll happen? Well, so Martin Seligman comes along. And, oh, we got the big blue here. Let's see if I need this anymore. No, I don't. he comes along and says, well, sometimes when random events occur, you can learn something. Because Rescorla and Wagner are saying, no, you're not going to learn anything with just a series of random events. And to make a long story short, Seligman comes along and says, oh, yes, you can. Under certain circumstances, when you have a randomly presented aversive stimulus, you sure do learn something. And he said in a classical conditioning way, because it involves an emotion and it involves an aversive US. And he said, what you learn is to become helpless. If you discover that you are shocked periodically and you can't predict when the shock is coming, and you have no control over that, you're going to learn to become helpless. And so his classic study on learned helplessness was he had these dogs sitting in a harness where they would get shocked periodically. Electric shock. Each one of these dogs in a yoked control procedure, meaning they're going to experience exactly the same thing except for just one difference. So every time one dog is shocked, the other one is shocked. Exactly the same way, exactly the same time, same strength of shock. And they each have a button in front of their snout that they can press to terminate the shock. The only thing is, for one group of dogs, when they depress the button, the shock is terminated. For the other group of dogs, when they depress the button, the shock is not terminated. But they all have buttons. The only problem is one group doesn't have any control over turning off the shock. All right, so you got these dogs going in there, and they're being shocked at exactly the same time, et cetera, et cetera. Now you got the dogs that can press the button and terminate the shock, and the other group of dogs that can press the button but does not terminate the shock. Then what they do is they put them in an avoidance situation like this. I don't draw very well, so my dogs and rats and birds, they look very similar. Here's a dog. Now the dog has been in this situation, okay? And what happens is they turn on a light, for example, a warning signal. And shortly after the light comes on, they shock the animal. Now, what do you suppose the dogs did that were able to turn off the shock when they were shocked? When they were put in this situation, light comes on, a couple seconds later they get zapped. What do you suppose they did afterward? Well, first of all, you could probably guess. When they're getting shocked, they're going to jump over this barrier, okay, to get away from the shock. So the dogs that were able to press the button to turn off the shock, what do you suppose happened when they were put in here? What do you suppose they did? They're jumping over the barrier to get away from the shock. What about the dogs that were in the same situation but pressing the button had no effect on turning off the shock? What do you suppose they did? They stayed there. They can easily jump over this barrier. They didn't even try to jump over the barrier. They just stay there and take the shock and start whimpering and that kind of thing, and whining. Why is that, do you think?
Because they believe that there's nothing else they can do about it to take the shock.
Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into their belief system. But what Martin Seligman said is that they learn to become helpless. And he called that learned helplessness. So in a situation where you're getting periodically and randomly shocked, where you don't have any control over the situation, you learn to become helpless. See, Rescorla and Wagner were saying, well, in a situation where there's a random presentation of CS's and US's, you're not going to learn anything. I mean, that's just what we just went over. You're not going to learn anything if there's this random presentation of CS's and US's. In a situation like this, and it didn't matter whether it was forward conditioning or backward conditioning or whatever, the animals that learned they didn't have any control over the situation stayed there and took the shot. Oh, so you mean you can learn something in situations where you are randomly presented with different stimuli, CS's, US's, and if it's an aversive US? Yes. If you don't have any control over the situation, you learn to become helpless. So that's a little twist on this whole random presentation of CS's and US's, just to, extend what we know a little bit further. So under certain circumstances, when there's a random presentation of CS's and US's is aversive, and you have learned you have no control over that, you learn to become helpless. You do learn something under those particular circumstances. Called it learned helplessness. So learned helplessness has been used to explain a lot of different kinds of behaviors. I think you probably see examples of this kind of learning where you've got maybe a child and at home, that one child is like the redheaded stepchild, You're stupid, you're an idiot. Oh, it's stupid Mikey again, Oh, that Mikey, he's just, I don't know, maybe you've known families like that where there's one child in the family where they're just, everybody picks on him, he's stupid, he can't do anything. Well, guess what? Then what he learns is to become helpless. Hey, why don't you do business? I can't, I'm stupid, I'm stupid Mike, or whatever. Or you've got a situation where you've got a student in school, you got a teacher that's picking on one kid all the time. I think that's probably the most insidious example of it is where you have a teacher that's berating or belittling some student, particularly somebody who has no control over their environment, like the dog, like the child in school that has to be there. See, that's the thing about children. They can't just decide, I'm not putting up with this, I'm out of here. No, sorry, you're not. You're like the dog in the hammock. You can't get out of it. So you sit there and take it. Well, my daughter, when she was in, and I think what happens is they become helpless. They develop learned helplessness. Maybe they don't belong in school. So anyway, my daughter, I remember when she was in, let's see, was it grade school? No, it was middle school. Maybe 6th grade. So she's in this class, and this one teacher should probably never have become a teacher. Shouldn't be in a classroom. I mean, I don't know. It's where they get this idea. But this teacher had a very intimidating way about her, and would berate these students and yell at them, And so my daughter came home one day and said, well, this child had his other notebook open and was doodling or something or other. And she said the teacher came up and just smacked the thing off the desk and hit the wall. And I'm like, well, at first I'm thinking, can I even believe this? I mean, this sounds so outrageous. Could this even possibly happen? Maybe my daughter's embellishing a little bit or something. So then she was in another class where the teacher was picking on her, this other teacher, and insulted her one day, and she came home, she was upset, she was crying. And so we thought, well, let's see, what are we going to do, parent-teacher conference or what? So with this other teacher, what we told her to do, we said, look, if that teacher does this again to you, I said, what I want you to do is get up, walk out of the classroom, go straight to the principal's office or the main office, and you call us, and then we'll have a conference with the principal. And so she said, okay. And so a couple of days later, here it comes again. So she got up, walked out, began to walk out of the classroom. She said, where are you going? What do you think you're doing? And she said, Mommy, Daddy told me to go straight to the principal's office and call them. Oh, no, come back in here. No, I didn't really need it. Whatever. And that was the end of it, and never happened again. So that's all it took. But there was no way I was going to tolerate that, And apparently that did the job. So it just wasn't necessary. But that other teacher I'm telling you about, there was just to speak to this one teacher's misbehavior. So the one that knocked the books off the student's desk, I had a question I wanted to ask her math teacher. And it wasn't anything, I wasn't really questioning anything the math teacher was doing. I just had a question about what they were teaching or something. It was just a very benign kind of a question. And all I wanted to do was talk to the teacher. I said, well, can I get her on the phone? I just want to ask her something about the curriculum, whatever. And they said, no, you got to have a parent-teacher conference. Just ask this question? Yes. I'm like, okay, all right. So we set up this meeting, and I thought I would go in there, and it would be just me and the teacher and my wife, and we just ask her this question. So we show up, and here's like 4 people there, plus the counselor, for a parent-teacher conference with the math teacher, that all I wanted to do was ask this one question. And I was sitting there going, what is? He goes, well, anytime a student has a problem or you want to talk to the teacher, we have to have the teaching team here, like all of her teachers from all of her classes. And I'm thinking, my God, Is this, the taxes are paying for these? I mean, every time you want to talk to a teacher, you got to have like 5 teachers there, and plus the counselor. And so anyway, I thought, what an incredible waste of time of these poor teachers and everybody, the whole system. It's just gotten crazy. So anyway, we go in there, we sit down, and here's the math teacher over here, and I said, well, Miss So-and-so, I just wanted to add, before I even got my question out of my mouth, this intimidating lady I'm telling you about, she stood up at this desk and slammed her hands down and went, all right, so you have a question about the curriculum? And she was like the history teacher or something. I was just like, this has nothing to do with you. You know, I mean, just like that, in my face. And I'm sitting there, and so I said to her, I said, this is interesting. I said, look at your posture. Well, what's wrong? And frankly, the other teachers were also looking at her, including the counselor, like, what is wrong with you? You know? And I said, look at your posture. I said, maybe we should reflect on that for a minute. And this sort of atmosphere that you're creating. I said, is this the kind of cooperative type of relationship we want to have? To ask a simple question, and all of a sudden she's just like backing off, and well, it was ridiculous. Her behavior was ridiculous. But what I'm guessing is she's been reinforced for doing that kind of behavior in the past, where maybe other people just sort of knuckle under or give into her ridiculous, displays. And so as soon as I brought attention to the way she was misbehaving, it immediately started to simmer down, and I thought, okay, this is much better now. But the whole thing has gotten so just, the only word I can think is stupid, just plain stupid. The whole system, the way it operates.
They still do it.
Huh?
They still do it.
I'm sure they do. I have no doubt. In fact, if anything, they probably call the whole school if we did that.
Yeah, we're not conference with my daughter, and there was the assistant principal, the principal,
at least with us, they didn't have the whole administration.
Oh, no, they were there. They were there. Even the speech therapist was there. Like,
oh, please, come on. The nurse, was she there?
No, she wasn't. Not the nurse.
Things become asinine. I hate to say it, but it's just asinine. Okay, yeah. All right, so learned helplessness. It's also been used to explain, possibly explain, like, for example, spousal abuse. So you've got this guy, and he's getting knocked around all the time in his marriage. And I just don't want to be sexist about the whole thing. But let's just say you got a spouse. And if you think about it, if you ever get married, it's usually a very big deal. So there's a lot of social pressure. This runaway bride thing, that doesn't happen. You got 100 people coming to this wedding. They've spent money on traveling. They've got wedding gifts and all this stuff, and your happy day is here, the girl's day. Which, by the way, now you guys think that this is about you and your spouse? No, it is not. It is her day. And do not question it. You just say, yes, it's your day. Because that's the way it is. And so anyway, you go to this wedding, all of these people show up, there's a lot of pressure. You're not going to be, even if you haven't cold feet, even if you're feeling like, oh, you're getting married today. And then you may have cold feet tomorrow, but not that day. So you go through the wedding, you get married, there's all this social pressure to stay married, and things are probably going to be okay anyway, usually. And so you get married, you go through all that, but then maybe things start taking a downward turn, and one person is getting knocked around or hit or something like that. And but still there's that sort of pressure to stay in there, and so you start taking it. And then maybe you feel like there's nothing you can do to get out of it, so you continue to take it. And then people start saying to you, this is crazy, this is ridiculous, why don't you just get up, just leave. Oh no, you don't know. You don't know her. She'll come get me. She'll, I can't, I just can't. Or my family won't let, or whatever. But there's this pressure to stay in it. Then you become helpless, and then you stop trying, and then you're stuck. That would be the learned helplessness sort of an explanation for some of that kind of behavior. And I think in some cases, I think that factors into it, particularly when you see people that are in these abusive relationships and they just feel like they can't get out. They won't get out. They can't get out. I think it's got more to do with not I don't think it's a lack of motivation. I think it's a behavioral pattern that they have learned, and it's called learned helplessness. That's what I think is going on sometimes. So anyhow, now you got the idea of learned helplessness. You can see somebody that's getting randomly punished and they've got no control over their environment, no sense of mastery. That's not a good thing. That's a bad formula. Any questions about that? Moving right along. Theoretical explanations of classical conditioning. Well, one of them, and I kind of was talking about it before, has to do with McIntosh. And they discuss his ideas on page 175. But McIntosh is the person that promotes this idea of attention. That classical conditioning will take place and you'll make a connection between a CS and a US to the extent that you're paying attention to the CS. But actually, the intensity of the CS and the intensity of the US play into this thing. So I'm just going to tell you that the two things that are important for classical conditioning are affected. One is the intensity of the CS and the other one is the intensity of the US. But to the extent that you're paying attention to a CS, classical conditioning will take place. Did I do my little demonstration with the CS pre-exposure effect and the lights? Did I do that in here? Turning the lights on and off? Yeah. That's called latent inhibition, or CS pre-exposure effect. When you've been pre-exposed to a CS, like I did with the lights, I turn the lights on, turn them off, turn them on, turn them off. But you notice there was no biologically reflexive US involved. It's just the CS, just this neutral stimulus going on and off. To the extent that you have experience with those lights going on and off and nothing follows it, no reflexive eliciting stimulus follows it, it'll be harder later on to get you to respond to those lights in a classical conditioning situation because you're not paying attention to it anymore. It's become irrelevant to you. Oh, lights going on and off. Okay, I can forget about that because I'm not going to get hit by a bus when the lights come on. Or nobody's going to shove food in my mouth when the lights come on. And so, McIntosh can explain that CS pre-exposure effect. So here's another exception to the rule. Oh, so you mean here's a CS, but there's no US, but some learning took place? Yes. That's called latent inhibition because it's an inhibitory learning that is not demonstrated. It's hidden. Well, how do I know you learned anything here? I don't really. It's latent. The only way I would know whether you learned something with the lights going on and off is that now I turn the lights on and I put food in your mouth. And I start pairing up the lights with the food. And then I just turn on the lights with no food and see if you salivate. And you will. But the thing is, if I did that same thing with the lights and the food with somebody that did not have that previous experience, they would learn to salivate quicker to those lights than you will. That's been demonstrated, so not with humans, but that CS pre-exposure effect has been demonstrated. So we know that you are learning things, and what might be important in some cases is attention, if you're paying attention. Well, what did Kamen say with blocking? What did he say accounts for this you not learning a connection here? Surprisingness. Remember that? He said to the extent that you're surprised by the US, you're going to get some learning. Well, when this CS1 comes on, bang, I'm surprised. I didn't expect this. But over here, when the US occurs, oh, I'm not surprised because the CS1 is there. Oh, I know that's coming. Therefore, no learning to this because you're not surprised by the US anymore. Different theoretical explanations for similar phenomena. One is based on attention, and the other way, and in this case, the CS2 would be irrelevant. I don't need to pay attention to that. In the case of Kamen, it's, I'm not surprised by the US. Rescorla and Wagner. Guess what? They can explain this too. We talked about the Rescorla and Wagner model, didn't we? The equation up on the board. Yeah, okay. And remember what they said? That each US possesses a certain amount of associative strength. And to the extent that you haven't used it up like gasoline in your car, you're going to get learning. Well, Rescorla and Wagner would say you don't learn any connection to the CS2 here because you used up all the associative strength back here. So when you get over here, there's none left for the CS2. Associative strength. Attention, you're not paying attention to this. Surprisingness, you're not surprised anymore by this. 3 different theoretical explanations for the same learning phenomenon. That's why in psychology I think you need to be able to think critically, because you're going, well, hey, wait a minute, there's 3 explanations for the same thing. Which one is right? It depends. There you go. It depends. But you can design experiments to ferret out these effects, I think, if you wanted to. But right now, as it stands, we've got 3 different theoretical explanations for this. The thing with the Rescorla-Wagner model, many people point to, is the fact that it predicts more than just one learning phenomenon. It predicts acquisition. That equation predicts a curve that actually matches real data when you collect data. It predicts acquisition. It predicts extinction. It predicts overshadowing. It predicts blocking. And it predicts something else called the overexpectation effect. Wow, there's 5 learning phenomena right there that their little equation can predict. Oh, that's maybe they really understand it. The problem I have with surprisingness is that's one of these sort of mentalistic, vague kinds of terms and processes. What is that exactly? We're going to measure how big they smile when they see the U.S.? I mean, so unless you can become a little more definite about what surprisingness consists of, then I'm not so sure that it's great. And attention, same kind of thing with attention. Surprisingness, attention, latent inhibition, also known as the CS3 exposure effect. On page 170, 178, they talk about superconditioning. Don't worry about that. There's not enough explanation there for you to really, A, understand it, and B, really matter. So just don't worry about superconditioning for the test. Stop page 170. It's kind of like over-expectation effect, superconditioning. Anyway, what else? Robert Bowles, middle of page 178. We should talk about Robert Bowles. What is this? Wow. It's bugging me. I don't want it down there. I keep looking down and there's this thing there. Robert Bowles, expectations. Well, now and if you think about it, with classical conditioning, we're starting to move into more mentalistic interpretations of classical conditioning. Surprisingness, attention, isn't that kind of a real cognitive idea? Yes, it is. And Robert Bowles comes along and says, well, I think it involves expectations. You mean these animals have some notion of a future event that hasn't happened yet? Yes, we call that an expectation. And he said that he thinks that what animals learn are both stimulus and expectations and response expectations, that we both sort of expect certain things to happen in the future because they've happened in the past, and also that we expect certain kinds of responses to be effective for us. So stimulus expectations, stimulus response expectations, but they're based on biology. So here's where Bowles kind of mixes stuff. He's starting to mix biology in with classical conditioning with this cognitive idea of expectations, kind of mixing it all together into this soup. And so, for example, I grew up in the city in Cleveland, Ohio, but my wife grew up in central Texas, around San Antonio area. And they were big time, like rancher farmer kind of things, and had a lot of animals and that kind of thing. So anyway, we get down here, and then we get married, we get down here, and my wife is, and when our daughter came along, she said, oh, we need some animal, we need a horse. So anyway, because they were in the business, they have a friend that comes down here periodically and brings horses down to the sale barn, sells like lots of horses and stuff like that. So they were down here one time selling these horses, and we went there to see them and, you know, just kind of get in the whole horse thing. But that's okay. When I was 8 years old or 10 years old, I wanted a horse in the worst way. But because we grew up just outside the city, it was like, there's no way to have a horse. But I told my parents, there was a fairgrounds down the road, so I went over there. There was an old horse there. I said, there's a horse over here at the fairgrounds. Couldn't we buy it? My parents. And this horse was blind in one eye. I mean, this thing was ready for the glue factory, you know. But I didn't know. It was a horse. I wanted a horse, you know. So when they were talking horses, I thought, yeah, this would be kind of neat. You know, I could get one of my childhood wishes fulfilled. So we're over there, and but I thought, well, just going to the sale and seeing the horses and being in the environment, I thought that would kind of take care of it. Well, the next thing I know, my wife's bidding on this horse. Or no, the horse, the sale was over, the auction was over, and he said, we got this one horse left over, that's what it was. And come on, take a look at it. And of course, as soon as everybody saw the horse, it was, we have to have this horse, you know, so, and it's so gentle, it would be a good horse for our daughter, our little daughter, because it won't buck her off or anything. Next thing I know, we own a horse. Now, we live in a subdivision. Do I have a place to keep a horse? No. Do I have a trailer to haul this horse? No, I got nothing except the horse. So we bought the horse, and then about 2 days later, the sale place is calling us up and saying, you can't get your horse out of here. And so, what a nightmare. We go there to get this horse. They got no trailer, but my father-in-law had a 16-foot flatbed trailer. So we get his truck, and we go get this horse, and we put some sheets of plywood on his 16-foot trailer with the horse. And what did I know? I'm going down the road with a 16-foot flatbed trailer with a horse standing in it with some plywood, and just hoping to God this thing doesn't jump off the trailer into the traffic or whatever, taking little back roads. Finally get the horse. To make a long story short, once you go down that road, you're going to buy the farm, okay? I'm sorry. Bought some acreage, got some horses, doing all. Now I'm playing, you know, Farmer Green Jeans. Gotta have a tractor, but that's okay. I like driving. It was fun. I like the tractor on my tractor, and I'm driving and shredding the grass, right? Now I gotta shred the grass. It's not enough to cut my lawn. I gotta shred 10 acres now it was fun for about 6 months. So I'm doing this, shredding the land. And I noticed as I'm going along with the tractor and the shredder behind me, that rats were jumping out of the grass up onto my legs. And they jump up and on my leg and fall off into the grass, you know. But so, you know. And then I noticed little jackrabbits in the grass. But what they did is they ran about 6 feet really fast and then froze. And I noticed these animals were doing different things. And I started thinking about bulls with his species-specific defense reactions. And I thought, I'll bet that's what I'm seeing right here. Is it for a rat who maybe gets eaten by snakes, that maybe jumping up high helps it to get away. It has a species-specific defense reaction, maybe, which is when it's startled, it jumps. With a rabbit, its species-specific defense reaction is to run 6 feet and freeze. And I'm thinking maybe with rabbits, they're more likely to get eaten, I'm just guessing, maybe by these hawks or these vultures or something that are flying overhead, and they see it and the thing just and freezes and then it disappears. Because movement is really essential for visual perception. So if they freeze, they just literally blend in, you can't see them. But for the rats, maybe the snakes are more of a threat. So a snake maybe is going to strike at you, but maybe if you jump, it misses you. I don't know. But I think what I was seeing were species-specific defense reactions, and I believe those animals, if they have expectations, have like, you know, SS and SR expectancies. If I do this, I don't get eaten. If I do that, I don't get eaten. What are jackrabbits? What's their species-specific defense reaction? Do you think? Jackrabbits. Rabbits with the really long ears. They take off running 100 miles an hour. And road runners, same thing. Do you ever see those things? It's almost surreal. You know. And same thing with jackrabbits. I used to enjoy seeing my father-in-law's, because he had some land right next door. the dogs would be going after these jackrabbits, and they would take off like a shot. And one, 300 feet down the road, and the dog, meanwhile, was, and then the jackrabbit's just sitting there watching them, and then they get close and it takes off in another direction. I think that all of these animals have these species-specific defense reactions, and that they're effective because it's tied to their biology, their genetics. So, both species-specific defense reactions and expectancy. That's kind of going, I don't know if that's going beyond the facts or not, but he's introducing this sort of a cognitive idea of expectancies in the classical conditioning, and mixing it in also with biology. That's Robert Bowles. So there's another sort of a take on what's involved in classical conditioning. Now, following on the heels of that, we get to Garcia, the Garcia effect, as it's known now. And Garcia and Poland, anyway, this guy, John Garcia, he came up with something called classically conditioned taste aversion learning. Classically conditioned taste aversion learning. And your book has conditioned taste aversion, or the Garcia effect. So what he did was, to make a long story short, in his original study, is that he had these rats that were exposed to bright, noisy water. And bright, noisy water consisted of like some clicking sounds and flashing lights and sweet tasting water, meaning the water had some saccharine solution in it. So the water tasted sweet, and there are these like noises and lights flashing while they're drinking the water. Okay, fine, that's just sort of some classical conditioning involved in there. We have some CSs, we got noises and flashing lights, and we have the taste of the water. Then what he does is, some of the group he made sick. He exposed them to lithium. Others, he gave them electric, he irradiated them. Gave them x-rays, exposed them to x-rays, so they got sick. The point is, for some of the animals, they were made to feel sick after they had the experience of drinking the bright noisy water, sweet tasting water. Then later on, what he does is that he shocks some of these rats as well after they drink the water. So we got shock going on, we got irradiation going on, we got lithium going on. So some of them were made to feel sick, and some of them were shocked. Okay, now he takes these animals and he puts them in a situation where they have a choice. They can drink out of two different water troughs. They can drink out of a water trough that has just sweet water, but no lights and no flashes or anything, but sweet water. Or they can drink plain water, but there's bright noises, bright lights and noises, and the same kind of thing that they experienced earlier. But the water there was no sugar in the water. The other rats had the saccharine water, but none of the external stimulant. Now, let me ask you this question. For the rats that were made to feel sick after they drank that water in the initial condition where there was the bright, noisy, sweet-tasting water, and then they were made to feel sick, when they were put in this other situation where they had a choice between the two water troughs, which one do you think they approached, and which one did they avoid? They were made to feel sick.
Yeah, they would go to the one without the lights, but once they taste the water, maybe they would try the other one.
That's not a bad guess. That's not what happened. But anybody else have another guess? These rats were exposed to something that made them physically ill after they drank sweet-tasting water with lights and cookies.
I think I go for non-sweet tasting water.
Why?
Because there's a connection between like what they ate and them feeling sick.
That's exactly what happened. The rats that were made to feel sick approached the plain tasting water that had the lights and the sounds. Well, what about the rats that were shocked with electric shock? What did that have any effect on their choice? It did not, you think? As a matter of fact, it did. They avoided the lights and the sounds and approached the water that tasted sweet. They were not made to feel sick. They were shocked with electric shock.
So they're able to tell the difference between like something that the water could have made you sick
Well, yeah, in fact, and this is called classically conditioned taste aversion. What they discovered was that apparently mammals, rats, and this has been demonstrated in other mammals as well, that mammals are biologically prepared to make some classical conditioning connections easier than others because of the way we're put together, our biology. So what they discovered was that for mammals generally have a fairly well-developed sense of smell and taste. And so it's important for us biologically to avoid things that make us sick based on how it tastes. And so what they discovered was that there are both interspecies and intraspecies differences in these biologically prepared responses. So the overall principle here is that your biology interacts with your ability to learn classically conditioned responses. Well, I'll give you an example of classically conditioned taste aversion in myself. So when I was a kid, my mother used to make this, and you could probably think of your own examples. When I was a kid, my mother used to make this cream chicken kind of a thing with little green peas in it. So there's this creamy sauce with chicken in it with little green peas. And then we used to put that on like some warm homemade biscuits. And I really liked it. Until one time I ate this, and about 2 hours later I got so sick I couldn't, it was just really horribly sick. Now, what happened was I made an immediate connection between being sick and the last thing I ate. The rats that were made to feel sick because they either got irradiated or they got exposed to lithium avoided the last thing that they ate, which was the sweet tasting water. With me, it was the cream chicken thing. And here's some other interesting points to make about conditioned taste aversion learning. It's unique in that hours can pass between the CS and the US. Remember I said about half a second, these things need to be close in time? Here's one example where there can be very long time intervals between the CS and the US. The US is being sick. The CS is eating the cream chicken and what it tastes like and what it looks like. The US is the getting sick 2 hours later. And yet, I made a really strong connection between fear and being sick and the chicken, cream chicken. So a very long time interval can pass between the CS and the US with conditioned taste aversion learning, and it usually only takes one trial. You don't have to get sick from this 3 times in a row. You get really sick, you eat something. You get really sick, done. One trial. Long time interval. Because of the way you put together. I don't know, can you think of some examples in your own life where there's something that you ate it, you got sick, and you don't touch it now?
So you don't touch it, sir? You don't eat that anymore? So you don't eat it? Or do you know, like, oh, I'm conditioned, so I'm still going to eat it?
I don't know, because I've never run across this cream chicken with little green peas floating in its stuff again, ever. So I don't know that it could still be there, I don't know. I'll give you another example. So I'm in graduate school, I'm working on my doctorate degree, and I had a little one-room place. Just big enough for a bed and a hot plate. And so anyway, that's where I lived, and I had this palm tree. This was like my diversion. I had a little palm tree. This is in Oklahoma. And I took care of my palm,
Yeah.
And one day I noticed that there looked like dust or something on the palm, and I took a closer look, and it was some kind of little mites or something all over the thing. I thought, oh, my palm, they're attacking my palm. And so I got some raid, and the windows were shut in this little tiny room, and I'm sitting there with this bug killer, right? And about 10 minutes into this, I'm going, you just gashed yourself. So I went outside, got some fresh air, resuscitated myself, and I was like, okay, I'm okay. All right, that evening I had to go do some laundry. It was Saturday, so I go to the laundromat, head into the laundromat, and I stop and pick up a fast food hamburger. I'm not going to slam any particular fast food hamburger place, but I picked up a fast food hamburger, ate it, go to the laundromat, doing my laundry. By the time I got finished with that laundry, now this is probably about 3 hours after I had been gassing the bugs, I was sick. I was so sick, I actually had to go travel home to another state because I was so sick. I didn't think I could take care of myself. That's how sick I was. I was just like, oh. All right, well, you can imagine what happened. I couldn't even get close to that fast food hamburger place after that. Even driving down the road, if I pick up the aroma coming out of that fast food hamburger, it would make me sick. I mean, I just couldn't eat it for years. Now, here's the question. Did the hamburger, do I know the hamburger made me sick? It could have been the bug spray. Or it could have been I just picked up the flu and I got a flu bug and it just hit me then, right? I don't know. It doesn't matter. I made a connection between being sick and the last thing I ate. That's classically conditioned taste aversion. And like I said, I'm sure you can think of your own things now with regard to the hamburger place. Can I still eat those now? Yes. After a while, this kind of learning may extinguish. And particularly if after a certain length of time has passed. But here's the interesting thing. One trial learning, long time interval, and we say that this kind of learning is resistant to extinction, meaning it does not extinguish easily. Mostly because you're avoiding what made you sick, the hamburger. So you don't know it's safe. So the conditioned avoidance responses in general are relatively resistant to extinction, meaning they're going to be with you for a while. And it's partly because you're avoiding that thing. So you don't know that it's okay now. Just like a phobia of an elevator. You avoid the elevator because it's you have a phobic response, and so therefore you don't know that it's safe to ride anymore. Well, we'll talk about that because we're going to be covering, I guess we're going to be John Watson, are we? We'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, that's Garcia. What about the rats that avoided the sweet tasting water, avoided the plain water and drank the sweet tasting water? Those rats were shot. So they made a connection between being shot and external stimuli, the lights and the clicking sounds. They made a connection between that and being shot. And both of those events, the CS events, the lights and the noise, and the electric shock, are both external to you. What something tastes like, kind of internal, and being sick, internal. They're sort of like the modality. They have something in common with regard to the modality. Two internal events versus two externally applied stimuli. They also discovered later on with some other studies that there are interspecies differences as well. That was an intraspecies difference I was just telling you about, but there are also interspecies differences. They used quail and rats, and what they found out is that quail can more easily learn connections between external USs and external CSs. Taste, that's not so important to them, apparently. They don't have a highly developed sense of taste, but they have a highly developed sense of what things look like, external events out there. But for mammals, particularly rats with a long snout, and dogs and animals like that, very highly developed sense of smell and taste. And so that's how they avoid things that are going to be hurt them. With birds, they have to pay attention to things outside, like that tree coming in. Is that going to hurt me? I don't think anybody's ever eaten their Christmas or their Thanksgiving food, like their turkey or whatever. And oh boy, wasn't that good. Then later on, sometimes on Thanksgiving, people start now. Anyway, on Thanksgiving, they go get their Christmas tree and they're getting their Christmas lights out for the tree and they're testing them out, you know. I don't think anybody's ever been testing their lights out at 9 o'clock on Thanksgiving after they ate at 5 o'clock and then they get shocked and sat there and went, oh, that darn turkey. I don't think anybody's ever made that connection. Well, anyway, I don't think anybody's gotten sick either and went, oh, those darn Christmas lights. Yeah, so. Condition taste running. This can actually work to our benefit because, I don't know if they talk about it here or not. Yeah, we'll talk about conditioning applied to medicine here in a little bit. All right, everybody understand conditioned taste aversion learning? Very good. Talk about, by the way, Garcia, when he first submitted his paper for publication, the journal wouldn't publish it because they didn't believe the results. They thought he was just making it up. So they refused to publish his paper, and he said, oh, this is real. No way. They wouldn't publish his paper initially. Eventually they did, but they just wouldn't believe the results. And so anyway, it's become known as the Garcia effect, this condition-based divergent learning. It's been used. They've applied it out in apparently Montana or someplace with farmers that have coyotes that kill their land, their sheep. And so what they do is they slaughter a sheep and put some poison in the sheep. And then here comes a coyote, and he eats the meat. He eats the lamb and gets sick. And then he's avoiding the sheep. There are a couple problems with that. So can you imagine what they might be? It works. It does work for a while.
More than one coyote.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, what?
There's more than one coyote.
Well, yeah, but maybe you get enough of the coyotes coming around eating it. But one problem with it is that they may learn to, avoid the dead sheep over there. We just go for the live ones. Being sick may get associated with just the dead sheep. Although I think the smell of the animal, etc., probably ties into it. So it is somewhat effective. But the other thing is that it's not permanent. It's not permanent. Eventually they'll go back to killing the sheep. So then you got to put another one out there with poison in it and so on. Anyhow, that's been one application of this. There's another one I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. Let's talk about John Watson. So John Watson comes along, who is by the way the person behaviorism, right? John Watson behaviorism. And he goes to this hospital in near Johns Hopkins, which is in Baltimore and Maryland. So there's this wet nurse at a hospital there close by, and by the way, he goes to Johns Hopkins as chair of the psychology department because they fired the previous chair because he had an affair with one of his students, and that's really for both. I mean, you don't have affairs with you don't have a personal, intimate relationship with your students. And no, you marry them like I did. But no, I married. My wife was in one of my classes, but I did not marry her when she was in my class. She was just a student. Let me make that perfectly clear. That was funny because one of her friends that took that class said, "Oh, what did you get in his class?" And the one sitting next to her, the student next to her, said, "She got the professor. What do you think she got?" Anyhow, that's how I met her, but we got married sometime later. Anyway, so he had this affair, and so they fired him, and they hired John Watson, and then he ends up having an affair with his graduate student, and they end up getting rid of him too, Rosalie Rayner. So he and Rayner get this boy named Albert from this woman. It was her son, and she was, like I said, working at this hospital. So they get Albert to come over. And did we talk about John Watson already?
No.
Okay. So they get the boy to come over, and they give him a white rat to play with. That's the neutral stimulus. I mean, Albert, in fact, he was relatively unresponsive to this rat. I mean, in the sense that he was what we call a relatively stable individual responder. I mean, he wasn't like, excitable or anything. And he's got no problem with a rat. He's playing with a rat. Then Watson sneaks up behind him and bangs on a metal bar and creates a loud noise, which startles Albert. And so what happens with the bar? Fear. All right. He starts crying. They give him back to his mother. They bring him back again, like a week later, and they start doing this some more trials. And what happens eventually, though, now is that after a number of trials of doing this white rat, loud noise, fear, white rat, loud noise, fear, they bring him in, they give him the white rat, and guess what happens? He's afraid of the white rat. He's crawling away from the white rat. That's called a CER, or Conditioned Emotional Response. It was learned. This fear of the white rat was learned. Remember, there was no fear of the rat? Now there is a fear of the rat. That's a relatively permanent change of behavior that took place as a result of experience. And they also discovered that this generalized to many other stimuli. Sometimes, though, these classically conditioned fears and phobias can develop with one trial. I will tell you that. They're not always due to classical conditioning, but classical conditioning very often plays an important role in it. But in any event, he developed this fear of the white rat. He developed fears of anything else that was white and fuzzy. And I have a videotape of Watson getting up close to Albert with a little little Santa Claus mask. Maybe you've seen this video. He's like right in Albert's face with this white fuzzy mask, and Albert's like crawling away and crying and that kind of thing. So, very often, these classically conditioned emotional responses may generalize to other similar stimuli, stimulus generalization. And that's what happened in this case. Now, there's this big controversy over whatever happened to Little Albert. I mean, people have actually spent lots and lots of time researching out whatever happened to Little Albert, because nobody really knows for sure.